Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I take it you're all here to see and hear about IoT, but let me spend a few minutes just to introduce myself. I'm a British entrepreneur and engineer. I've been doing a few startups in London and also in Berlin. I like to work on what I think is the cutting edge of technology. A few years ago, I very well remember sitting in a similar room and talking to a group of people about the cloud and where the cloud is going those days. And a couple of years ago, I found a personal hobby of mine, IoT, to come back big in the industry, and I'm very pleased to be in a position where I can actually contribute to that one. I want to talk a little bit about the IoT, how I see that at the moment, where I see the products, where I see the services. I think there is a big way of distinguishing between different products in IoT. It's very overloaded naming scheme at the moment. I've seen a lot of IoT products that actually don't even connect to the internet. In my opinion, they're just things, but still they're branded as IoT. And I think we can spend a few minutes talking about that one as well. So for the first part, what I think we have today, it is on purpose, a little bit simplified, but to give you an idea of how I think that is, we have a light switch. A light switch, in my opinion, is a fantastic device. It's got 100% reliability. It is usable. Everybody knows how to use a light switch. It's a fantastic little device. I can go to any house I like, I find a light switch, I know how to use it. And it does what I want it to do. It is a really nice device. And what do? We replace it with an app. So instead of me coming home, turning on the light, I find my telephone, I find out it has no battery, so in the dark, I go and find the charger, I charge it up, and then I can turn on my light. That's just really wrong, in my opinion. Replacing things that just work with an app and calling it IoT, it isn't quite cutting it. And that's a lot of it what we do at the moment, which is fair because it's still young and we're still trying to find things. But that's really what we have at the moment. So I like to work on the cutting edge of things, as I said. So I have a really disruptive startup, and what we did was, we actually did a light switch and an app. But what we do differently, there is a difference, and the distinct difference what we do is, because I think of the next generation light switch, it needs to be flexible, it needs to do what I want, when I want it. Who says the light switch needs to do the same thing all over again? It's actually a sensor. I can make the light switch on my tea kettle, one of my most favorite devices in my household. I can make it switch on a television. Or another very useful function might be to switch off the internet connection for my children. It's got a wonderful side effect. I actually start talking to myself. And it's really cool, even though only to complain, but still they talk to me. I can actually add value to the light switch. I can make it something new. I don't replace what I have with the same functionality and then make it IoT. No, I have to add a service. I have to add value. I have to make it changeable. What works for me as my light switch, which might switch my cherished tea kettle, might be something completely different for any one of you. And I need to build the device in such a way that I can adjust it. I can modify it. That's actually the power we have of IoT, is we can make these devices smart enough to work in a way that fits you. And not only you, but millions of people. We don't have to find a single use case. We might need to make it so that it can change itself. However, it is a problem. It's a problem that we faced fairly early on when we established our company, and we also find it's a bit of a problem for the entire industry. Having looked at what have we got around on types of industries, and we find everyone builds their own little thing. Everybody wants to try and establish a de facto standard. And it has worked fantastically well. I remember in the late 90s when we had web browsing experience where we had a de facto standard and suddenly all the websites were incompatible unless you use a particular browser. It's a nightmare. What we have is we have devices where you need base stations, particular end products to work with particular remote controls. None of those work together in a seamless manner. Partially, there is a problem because the development of IoT firmware is actually very, very expensive to do it right. It's not cheap. It's not something like most companies who have a skill in manufacturing things and a very slim margin can afford to do. because it takes years and skills for development. Not to mention the management of devices. What we know from data centers where we have millions of devices, we have idle operations, we have established processes, we have very careful monitoring. Now, if we translate it into millions of devices, suddenly we don't have as well-established practices. Even most of the devices don't even have the functionality to be upgraded, to be monitored. When these devices crash, most people don't, or most vendors don't even know that they have crashed badly enough. Yeah. Personally, at home, I got a Hoover, I got a television, and I got a washing machine. They all want to be upgraded by USB sticks. Needless to say, they're being a little bit out of date at the moment. Yeah. So what's wrong with that one? Yeah? The one thing is, what we always hear about is Gartner regularly predicts us gazillions of pounds in the IT market. Loads of pounds, but what I haven't seen yet is the famous unicorn, which is now worth $20 billion and having made money in the IoT. And Gartner equally predicts every year there should be more money coming, more and more and more, but there isn't. Yeah? It's stuck. Yeah? We're stuck. It's not taking off as predicted over and over again. Yeah? The things that we build at the moment, they're way too complicated to keep traction. Yeah? If I look at the things, and trust me, we bought a lot of these things and tried those. They're all very, very complicated. Some of them are so complicated that I can't install them, or maybe they were just faulty, but I couldn't. Some of them were so complicated when I gave them to my kids, they lost interest after 5 minutes saying, no, it's too complicated, and threw it away, which is fair. An IoT device should be simple. It should be simple, it should be replacing something that is in utility at the moment, so we have to keep it very, very simple. Yeah. It also requires an internet connection, which sounds sort of straightforward if we're talking about the Internet of Things. But what we have at the moment, we have situations where the devices have to work even if there isn't an internet connection. Going back to my light switch, one of my favorite examples due to its lovely simplicity, a light switch works without an internet connection. And frankly, if I have an automation in my house, it's lovely if it connects to the internet, but it still needs to work even if there's no internet connection. It's an utility that must run all the time, and that's something we often forget. Many of the solutions out there, they only work if there's an internet connection, or they don't have an internet connection at all. We've seen both, but the solution needs to work better with an internet connection, but the base functionality must work without an internet connection. There's very little on automation. Most of these devices don't make my life any easier. They just make me do things via my app rather than via my switch, which isn't that exciting either. So we're not gaining traction by just having devices that do the same thing, just more complicated. Yeah. And quite simply, what we also see at the moment, these devices don't work. They simply crash too often. They're too complicated. When I look at the reviews from anything from Amazon into most of the magazines I'm reading, the biggest complaint is that it's not conceived as secure, and they just stop working. And they need to be rebooted, then they work again. One needs to be speaking to supplier, and then it works again. But that is not what we want from our household devices. These are things that just need to work. And here, also, just mention it a little bit, security, IoT, on purpose, 2 sentences. At first, I had it in 1 sentence, but I thought if I put security and IoT in 1 sentence, I thought here in the speech there's going to be a black hole and I'm going to be sucked into it. So I made it 2 sentences on purpose, because there isn't any at the moment. Security and IoT is a mess. We have people with firmware that is written in weeks, and there's literally no thought to security whatsoever. And if we do continue that way, then it deserves us that we are not going to be taking off. Thank goodness we're not taking off as other industry partners predict, because that would be a challenge to manage in the aftermath. So again, here we need to very carefully think how we can do that, and there are certain challenges that we haven't solved yet, particularly sort of mathematical challenges where we need to work on, and the industry is, so some of the open source community is very, very actively thinking about it. But again, we just need to keep working on that one. So, saying that there is something wrong with IoT, why is it wrong? Yes, it's not quite quite clear. So we looked into what do we have to do to make this take off, to give us traction, and to get the IoT into a state what everybody predicts. Because, frankly, some of the devices that are out there from the factory process, they're lovely, they're very good, they're fantastic, even some fantastic little Wi-Fi kettles or some washing machines that have a reporting cycle which works reasonably well. They're manufactured incredibly well. I can see there's quality thought process in the engineering of these devices. However, in the whole stack, in the complicated stack of doing IoT, there are many, many different skills that are required to do a full stack. And even though some people are good at manufacturing, some people are very good at writing software, some people are very good at making websites and dashboards. But if you pull all that together from the electronic engineering, from the firmware, from the management of these devices, from the processes, from the web design, all that together in one company is very hard. And traditionally, at the moment where much of the IoT comes from, is actually from two sections. One is the traditional manufacturer who's adding development skills, and the other ones are developers who are adding manufacturing skills. And we see both are, let's say, not ideal. It's hard. Even though many good vendors excel at their discipline, but the full stack is something we have a problem integrating. There's some good efforts. Even though currently cooperation is lacking, one of the positive examples we found is it's one of our interesting, very similar names, is the HyperCat, which is a governmental institution or sponsored by the European Union. And I feel I have to mention that because it's actually got their seat in Britain. And we as Brits, we have to always now very much stress that we're in favor of cooperation, so we don't get left out. And this is a very good organization that actually does take care of a lot of cooperation on the governmental level and establishes standards. So there is some effort, particularly in the European Union, and in some efforts. But it hasn't come all the way yet. We still have a lot of little islands here. If we look at what previously happened when we had situations like that, then I thought, what has happened? What examples do we have of previous situations that were similar? I mentioned the web briefly before. We all know the web has been a huge success, a big penetration in the market, and lots of people make a lot of money with it. It is an open standard. It always has been an open standard. Right from the beginning, it was defined as if you make it like that, it will look like that, and everyone could use it and could build new functionality using this one standard. Another big achievement was finally when phones started using ISDN. Think of nowadays we can take any phone in the world, plug it in anywhere in the world. We can actually make a phone call from here to anywhere in the world without compatibility problems. That's what we need to achieve in IoT eventually. That's the challenge. It's not to do with governmental regulations necessarily, because there is no worldwide body governing that. It just makes sense that we start working together like that, because then we can start sharing our skills, and some people are better in making telephones, some people better in exchanges, some people might be better in doing the service around it. And as long as we can start splitting that up the value chain, we will be a lot more successful. Wi-Fi was a similar example. Some of you might remember the early 90s when we had different Wi-Fi standards, and you've been running around with Wi-Fi cards, one from Motorola, one from Cisco, and I think D-Link was another standard. And depending on which access point you had to put that card, a PCMCI card, in your laptop. It was terrible until the Wi-Fi consortium sorted out and said, here's our open standard, all adhere to that one. And after a little bit of mucking about, people start adhering to that one. And of course, the biggest, one of the biggest achievements here with Linux, it being open source and being freely available for everyone, it gave us the cloud, it gave us IaaS, it gave us routers and smartphones. It happened because we have an open standard that we can use, that we can rely on, and that we can review. Yeah. We also have here, and what that allows us is that each stakeholder in this chain can focus on their primary business. In the example of Linux, we see that very cleverly. Very clearly. We have people like Red Hat who work on the Linux kernel and a bit of the distribution. We have the other end of it, where we have people like Amazon and Profitbricks utilizing the power of Linux and building add-on services. I tried to make a little graph, which is, might look a little bit geeky, but here we have, on the top end, we have the vendors, the hardware manufacturers. These are the people who make tea kettle, washing machine, fridges, etc. On the other end of the spectrum, the yellow ones, here we have what we nowadays call a lot of these IoT applications, which are the apps, which are websites with dashboards, which are very specific applications sometimes for very specific use cases for vendors. But what we need in the middle, and that is something that's actually at the moment still very hard to get by and very incompatible most of the time, is all the connectivity, is the firmware, is the electronics, making that manageable. Writing the firmware that makes this whole process transparent so that we can have developers who are developing and spending hard-working time on making the app look good, making dashboards onto the cloud, and then having that translate into electrical signals right at the top. That's actually a process that currently is very neglected, and you don't find many startups trying to make money there, because actually also quite hard and has got some unsolved challenges. As an example of how the market looks a bit like, we have down there, as I just mentioned, we have the connectivity and the device management, sort of the lower end of the scale of the firmwares and the electronics. On top of that, we usually have processing of rule engines to take certain actions, like if this, then that, for example. We have data visualization, loads of dashboards where we look at what do my sensors do, what's the temperature, what goes with that. We have analytics. We have fantastic little things from Google that tell you exactly what you're going to do. They tell you what to do. They tell you even what you should change in order to do what you usually do. We have a couple of additional tools from development tools, a couple of reporting items. And then we have external interfaces we can plug into these devices. It's a long, huge stack which requires different skills from different people, from different companies, because all these require a different setup, different way of managing, different way of running the business, and different business models. Throwing this together all into one company is incredibly hard, and few companies, I would think, are at the moment capable of doing so. Certainly, none of them has so far succeeded to become the unicorn and the de facto standard. Going into slightly different representation of what the bits are, a bit more technical, where we have here on the bottom, we have the connectivity, we have the devices and the sensors. Equally, what we do for IoT, which is perhaps unusual, we have set everything onto open source and continuous deployment. So we're starting to adopt what we find in software development, typically, when we have test-driven development and we have continuous deployment. We do that in IoT as well. We go as far as we say, if we check in code, it gets run on the device seconds later. It runs test suites automatically. It starts a staged rollout. We track the success of the software. If it runs on the first 1% of devices, we go to the next 5%. Best practices from software development, we can apply them to IoT, even though the tools for that are still basic. We built a few, and we had to write a lot of our own stuff for that, but it does work quite nicely, and it needs to be that seamless. If we go further down, I'll skip most of the other stuff because I think most of you will be familiar with REST APIs, data aggregation. I think one thing worth mentioning, though, is the bits in gray at the top. I've seen a lot of distinction between, or graphs distinguishing between industrial IoT, consumer IoT, government IoT, and even some other IoT branches. Now, if you look at the whole stack, the whole stack is complex, but if you end up at just the use case, what a government might do versus what an industry might do, it actually isn't that different. all we need is the same. We need the same things. We need the security. We need the stability. We need to manage devices. That's a bit of the value chain that we can add and we can modify. And I'm sure there are expert companies who will do that, but we need to provide the basis to work on first. So we must learn to walk before we can run. And I often think what we see in IoT devices, we're actually trying to run, even though we haven't really started yet proper. So, coming to the part which is, in my opinion, the fun part, which is why I'm trying to work on the cutting edge. What's next? I get a little hint on what I think when I look at previous trends, what can happen. I think what's next, sort of, we can see what happened in the past. We can see in the past, once it becomes open source, or at least an open standard, that's going to be a big game changer. I think there will be, in the future, a lot more companies who are going to license some parts of it. The value chain will be going apart a little. We don't have one company doing it all, but we see startups that say, here is my bit of the value chain, go license it. We see it very much in the application section, very much so already, where we have a lot of the analytics in the dashboard. It's typically as a service. The lower we go down at the moment, we don't see factories that allow you to specify what you want to have built and build it for you, to some degree, but not really as a service, not as one would expect as a service from what we used to on the internet. Similar with the whole connectivity, the management of the devices isn't really available as a service yet. Well, it is, of course, from my startup, from the Singing Cat. That's exactly what we do. We provided IoT as a service, but we're one company, and there should be at least dozens or 50 or 100 in the future, because I think there is a lot of room for a lot of people providing these services with different USPs. Furthermore, I think we're going to go more into fully automated processes working for people. I'll give you here an example, because I've prepared an example for which my colleagues always laugh at when I describe how I see the future of IoT, what it does for me, because I'm inherently lazy and don't want to press light. Actually, I don't want to press any light switches or door handles at all. And we have an office in an old industrial estate, and on that estate there is a bit of a way to go from the front gate to our office. Yeah. So saying that, what I wanted to do is, when I leave home, which surely Google and Apple and a lot, they know about. Yeah? When I leave in the morning, they can just switch off the stuff I got at home because I don't need it. I'm on the road, so switch it off. Do that for me. Don't make me think about it. And when I'm on the road, start heating my office to 20 degrees because that's why I like it. And admittedly, being a startup in a garage, last winter it was actually really cold when I arrived. If you have an office that's like 4 degrees, it's not nice. Yeah? It takes a while to heat up. So start heating it to 20 degrees. And when I arrive, it might as well open the gate to the estate of the industrial estate. Do it. I don't want to get out of the car because it's cold. Open it for me. Let me drive through. Then switch on the lights from the gate to the office. Open the door when I arrive. When I go into the office, the tea kettle should have boiled so I can make my cup of tea. The computer should be on. And then I can go back onto my desk and pretend to do some work, which is exactly the way I want it. And I want to do the same reverse when I get back. That's all IoT should be able to do for me. I'm pretty sure that your process, how you like it, might be different. Maybe you don't pretend to do work, maybe you actually do work. Yeah? There might be other ways that you might differ, but it should be adjustable to how you want it. That's what we should be able to do with IoT, much more focus on automation, and I think that's where it's coming towards. Yeah? When all the things start working together, we can do a lot of automation. We can do simple processes that we currently are so used to repetitively doing is actually something that IoT can solve for us and do for us. Yeah? With the power of analytics in the background, we might actually be in a position to do it predictively, which is very nice, because then we can start saving money, making things more, predicting things accurately means we can save on the light switches, on the light being on, or on the heater being on, because it only does it when required. Yeah? So there's a lot of potential there to actually make an impact and change things if we get this interoperability solved, and if we get it solved, that these things actually work and are utilities. Yeah. Similarly, I think a note for vendors, for the manufacturers, I think there's a lot of very, very, very good factories that produce a lot of cool stuff, and maybe it requires a little bit of creativity on the vendor side to say, I don't know what I can do IoT-wise with this thing I'm manufacturing, but ask people in the IoT industry, because there may well be a use case how we can do it. And if we do it as a service, it doesn't cost much either. I'm thinking of things like that might not typically come to mind if you talk about IoT, but there are garden hoses, there are door handles, there are some things that we might not think about it. But usually, when we enable it for IoT and we do it properly, so we can automate things with it and make it individual to the users, then we don't know the use case, but there are literally billions of people out there, and if a few million come up with a use case, you will sell your product. It's the thing about IoT, what I learned is I can come up with lots of funny use cases that people even laugh about and saying, you're crazy, but then they have one that's even crazier. And we should build something that allows us to adopt to these people. So I think in the future, there will be a lot more of that, a lot more of automation, a lot more of open standards, because I think the value chain will split apart into different sections of the value chain. And I think we get simply more things working together, because the market will drive us towards that. And we're not selling, as Gartner predicted at the moment, we still have a potential of billions. And in order to tap that, it is the only way forward really is to make standards and make these things work together. And it will happen eventually. I can't say how and when, but I think it will happen. And I hope it will happen. Last but not least, who are we? Now, I mentioned Singing Cat a few times. That's what we do. We do the firmware, we do the electronics, we do connectivity, device management. That's what we've been doing over the last couple of years with all sort of high learning curve. Doing things differently than other people do has got the effect that we actually have to very carefully think about it and get some very, very clever people involved who know their part, from the security, from the connectivity. It's not something we all bring with us and say, we're not born with that and know exactly how radio waves work. But that's sort of, we set out and said, we want to bring that into one hat and want to do that. If you want to know more, we have a website, www.singingcat.net. We're also here with my favorite IoT hoster, the ProfitBricks, a cloud or internet as infrastructure as a service company, I'm supposed to say. I host there, and I want to say a nice word about ProfitBricks at this point, why they're very useful for IoT. For me, having tried others, important here is very, very quick to scale. I sometimes have the demand that hundreds of sensors or thousands of sensors come at the same moment. Sudden temperature changes, for example, or this typical phenomena that the sun goes up, happens every day, and every day I'm surprised by it because suddenly I need lots of servers to process the data. ProfitBricks helps there a lot because we have a very fast and quick scale up and scale down time, and I'm only paying by the minute, and the machines are pretty fast and reliable. So very nice for IoT. Couple of other lovely technical, geeky things around it, but lovely. We have a stand out there with ProfitBricks together, so if you want to know more, I also will be there for the next time. That's it. Thank you very much. I hope it was interesting, and I hope to see you again. Thank you very much.